thank you to all of you from all over the world who are joining us here tonight, from all of your places and all of your different times. I can see some of you during the day and some of you at night, so thank you for being here. So we are the Animate Earth Collective. And we have with us tonight one of our very favourite Irish animists, Manchán Magan, who I'm very sure a lot of you will be familiar with. He is a writer and a documentary maker, and he's well known for his very beautiful and evocative writing on the myth and magic and monsters and language of Ireland. You'll probably know some of his beautiful language books that show how the Irish language is very much tied into nature and the magical way of seeing that the Irish ancestors had. So it's very much that nature and magical way of seeing that we are going to be talking about tonight. So very specifically, we are interested in his latest book, Listen to the Land Speak, which is on the subject of one of our very regular conversations, this idea that the land is trying to communicate with us, if only we could understand how to hear it. So before I bring Manchán in, I am just going to read a session from near the end of this beautiful book, which I highly recommend. So much of recent scientific discovery seems to be pointing to the truth that the earth is alive and that its health can be gauged by the state of its tissues and organs, the wetlands, rivers, forests and soil. Simply put, all life is unified and interconnected. We cannot survive beyond our surroundings. We are part of the land, and the land wishes to communicate with us. So welcome, Manchán. I would love you to begin us tonight just by telling us a little bit about what you mean about the land speaking to us. What is it that you understand that to mean?
So when I say about the land speaking, it's on many different levels. There's more abstract ones and then more intellectual or academic or literary or more tangential ones. And maybe it's easiest to start with the ones that are more visible and sort of less emotional, less abstract. So, you know, my work looks at Ireland, and I suppose that's where my expertise is. But it's become clear in the last few years that our ancestors had this profound connection with the land. They knew what it wanted. They were in a deep relationship with it. And that knowledge went to sleep for a while. It was the potency of the land we sort of forgot in the last 100 years, which meant that we started manipulating it and polluting it and treating it in unsustainable ways. But what's arising over really on the last decade is this awareness in people. And it's hard to say whether it's coming from the mind or coming from the soil itself or the land. But like even an awareness of the name of Ireland. So Ireland is, you know, Ireland. It's from Eru, the goddess Eru, Eru's land. So the Vikings, you know, would have Eru apostrophe S land, and that's where the word Ireland comes from. And even that name tells us so much about our relationship with the land. Like Eru was a goddess. She was the granddaughter of Dagda, which was the great god of the people, the god of sort of all good things was the idea. And we know from this that Eru was fostered by Cuddle the round-breasted. And cuddle is an Irish word still today. It means cuttlefish or shape changer or, you know, skin changer. So basically we're being told, even by the name of Ireland, that it was, you know, the grandson of this goddess. It was fostered by this person, the shapeshifter. And then Eru was married to Grian or Mach Draina, which is the sun. So in every way it's saying there is so much more to this land than just a country. It is a place that was created by a shapeshifter, the grandson of the all-powerful God, and is in profound relationship with the sun. And So as I said, this was something that was accepted and it was known, and it's gone to sleep. And there was attempts maybe 100 years ago to revive this knowledge. And in fact, W.B. Yeats and the people of the Gaelic revival went back to the myths and looked for the first time at the archaeology and realized, oh my God, there's so much going on in this land. The land, every single hill, every single place name, every single ancient Neolithic monument is trying to communicate to us. Now, the information 100 years ago, they were good because they were able to look at these myths, that were kept alive in Ireland for thousands of years, both in the Gaeltacht, the Irish-speaking area where the myths never died out, but then in the rest of the place where the colony had more power and English was taken over from Irish, the stories survived in the lore, in the myths, which the monks kindly wrote down from us from like the 7th or 8th century on. So we have all of this myth, or with all of these stories, just Eru is just one of them. But then we also have the archaeological side. Again, these are the two sort of more rational elements of how the land is speaking. And in terms of the archaeology, it's really, Ireland is probably known for its passage tombs. We call them passage tombs. These Neolithic, again, they're called grave sites or tombs, but they're not. They were ritual sites in the countryside, like Newgrange and Lough Crew and Nouth and Douth. A lot of them along the Boyne River. Again, the Boyne River is another sacred goddess. We might talk about that in a bit. But I don't know, you do have a sense of the passage tombs. They're these stone circular buildings underground, and they have a sort of a hill on top of them. Like clay has been mounded on top to create a belly or a womb in the land. And the stone, these ritual ceremonial sites that, as I say, archaeologists now agree they're not just tombs. They are something. They're a ritual ceremonial place. They have these long passages into this sacred womb at the very center. And once a year, either at the equinox or the solstice, the sun they will be orientated so the sun runs the whole way down that passage. And really what that passage, it's a birth canal, it's a vaginal canal. And so the entranceway is where most of the decorative art is, which is, for all the world, it's like a vulva into a passage, like a birth canal down that leads down to this sacred ceremonial site at the beginning. And so the sun in Irish culture was always male, the land is female. So we get this sense that the male sun enters the female, impregnates her and fertilizes the seed, and so she gives life. So the monuments are telling us, oh yeah, long ago, our ancestors believed we had a deep, profound relationship with the land. And basically those monuments are speaking to us today. The myths are speaking to us today. But the third element is the more ephemeral. This idea, the land is speaking to us. And again, I've been working over the last, so I suppose I spent about 9 years like researching this, but in the last maybe 3 years, I'm working more with native indigenous people, with Aboriginal people in Australia and Native Americans. And they're telling something that the old people told me when I was young in the 1970s in West Kerry, but it's not being talked about much now. This idea, the land will speak to you through dreams. The land wants to communicate, particularly at a time of urgency, where we know that for thousands of years, like my language on Gaelga, and Gaelga could be a lower to go, language that I speak, has been spoken on this island for 3,000 years. But then our culture, like within my genes, I have this DNA going back 5,500 years. So we have this deep connection that we only managed to survive on this rocky, like hostile, windswept land by having this profound connection with the land. So, as I said, the monuments are telling us this, the archaeological sites, the myths are telling us, and the third element is more vague, and it is that the land itself seems to be telling us. And how can I prove that? I mean, one way I could prove it is, if we need to be rational, is that says, my books, you kindly mentioned 30, Listen to Land Speak. And the year before that, or 2 years, I had this book, 32 Words for Field. Now, they were books about Irish myth and Irish language. They would not have sold in Ireland. We were totally divorced from our culture. It just wasn't relevant to us. We have been like living this, life of just trying to survive, of trying to get enough jobs, not to emigrate. Like the land has not had a time to do that. We, as a people, have not had time to indulge with our connection with nature. It was something Britain did, but the Irish, we just needed to exploit it to survive. And then something happened in the last 5 years. Like my book, the first book sold 90,000 copies. Listen to Land Speak has sold similar. That has never happened in Ireland before. So just from an Irish context, something is sparking deep within us. And a lot of it happened during COVID. We started walking and swimming like people did all over the world. And we just had this reconnection. We decided, no, the land wants us to engage with it in a different way.
So if the land is communicating with us, Manchán, what do you think that communication is? I know that's a big, almost impossible question to answer, but yeah, what's your sense of what's going on? I always feel that there is a communication that we're missing, that is something about our responsibility and our place in the kind of wider web that we're just totally forgotten and missing. What's your sense of it?
Yeah, again, it's so clear. You know, when I say listen to land speak, and in one way we would love, like I said, the native people say to me, we need to go and sit on the land and listen. And sometimes the wrong answers will come because this is awkward for us now, because we're not as in touch with these old ways. So, you know, the ideal way is that we listen. But in fact, for the moment, we don't need to. The myths are screaming information at us. And really what they're mainly saying is the land was a goddess. So in Ireland, every single name, Irish name for a river is a feminine. You know, Irish and Scots Gaelic are either male or feminine. They're two genders. Every name is a female name, as a feminine gender, and most of them are actually named after goddesses themselves. So, you know, like the Shannon, the great big river of Ireland, the Shannon or the Shannon is named after Shannon or Shunanya, the old Anya or the Shinna, the nipple. It's hard to know what this goddess is, but there's a whole story about this goddess sought more wisdom, sought more knowledge, and went to the source of that, which is the wells, the sacred wells of Ireland. Like Ireland has more sacred wells than any other country in the world. We managed to keep that deep connection. You go to Aboriginal Australia and the water holes would be the sacred place. In Ireland, there was the wells. And again, a bit like the passage tombs, they are, it seems what the myths are telling us is they are vulvas. They are again entranceways into the goddess. So the Shunnag on the Boyne I mentioned, where all these monuments, these archaeological monuments are, is Boinda, the cow goddess, a sort of goddess who nourishes her people with her life-giving milk. The ban woman, female. Bandia is a goddess. The Bandan, the same Bandia. The Ini is named after Etna. Etna is the goddess of the grain. Or then there's Anya, which is the goddess of brightness. So we managed to keep these names, and again, not only the names, but every one of these rivers has a story about a goddess. How either the goddess would have gone to seek wisdom, to seek enlightenment, and would have drowned by either she drowned by being uppity and daring to look for knowledge, or really what happened is she became bigger than the world and transformed into a river, so that that river could then nourish us with its life-giving water, just as the Boyne River nourishes its people with its life-giving milk. So in some way, that's what it's trying to tell us. The land is a goddess, and she is willing to birth all the food we need and to look after us and to birth us as well once we respect her. And the key place you see this is in Munster. So in the southern province of Ireland, the main goddess there is Anya or Anna. So the Tuatha Dé Danann were this spirit people before the Milesians arrived in Ireland thousands of years ago. The Tuatha Dé Danann. Tuatha means the people or the land of Dé Danann. It's either of Danu, which is an old Celtic goddess, or of the Anya, of Anya. So Anya is this powerful goddess. And there's a place in Limerick called Loch Gur, okay, and it's known as the center place of Anya, of the goddess. And there's a pregnant belly right at the center of this lake, a big pregnant belly, and that's where she resides, and that's where her energy gives birth to things. And even Loch Gur, again, the name, all the information you need is in that name. Gur means incubation or pregnancy. In the same way as Eru, I didn't tell you, Eru, the goddess's name, actually means giving birth or fertility. So Anya is the goddess of fertility, of goddess. Eru, the whole land of Ireland, Eru's land, is the goddess of fertility. All they're trying to tell us is this land is nourishing to us and nurturing once we do right rituals with us. And the rituals were always sacral kingship or sacred kingship. The idea was, and again, you'll find this in all of our myths, the Finn Skeltig, the Ruriacht, which is the Cuchulainn stories. And they're all saying, and even then back, like even historical accounts from the 12th century, although they're not as trustworthy, they say about the male king going in sexual relationship with the goddess, with the land, and that giving forth the bounty. So what it means is humans, or men, but humans are the custodians of the land, and if they look after it right, it works well. But what we're told so clearly, let's say in Lough Gur, this lake connected to Anya. So like the whole of Munster, the whole of this vast province of Cork and Kerry and Limerick and Tipperary, it's one big goddess. So in Limerick is her pregnant belly. Then another part of Limerick is Cnoch Anya, which is the head of Anya. And then the paps of Danu, or the paps of Anu and Killarney, are two breasts. You can still see, you can see her belly in the landscape, you can see her head, you can see her breasts. And where her breasts were, again, because that was where we were nourished, that's where the great myths and the history and the lore is mainly found, in Sliabh Luachra. So if you mention any great musician, Irish musician, or poet, or storyteller from long ago, they're always connected to this area, Sliabh Luachra, beneath the paps of Anu. But there's one story that sort of tells us what we need to do. And it's to do with every 7 years, Lough Gur, the lake that it represents Anya's fertility, it vanishes. It vanishes completely, dries up, and is left with one single tree. A single tree, and over the tree is a great broth oinya, a green blanket. And the stories of men trying to steal this blanket. So it looks like the power of Anya, of the goddess, is gone. Underneath, you just have this old crone, an old cailleach, an old witch. If we have time, we need to talk about the cailleach, the old hag in Ireland. It's powerful, powerful. But the man is said to steal the blanket away. And suddenly the old cailleach, the old crone, the old woman underneath, rises up in all of her power. And she says, Hot, a boy na vailav marco here the man marav of fodachan vrot oina dum vahas. Like, we're so lucky that we have these words from thousands of years ago. And so what does it mean? Hot a boy na vailav. Get away, you big idiot. Marco here the man marav. The rider from the land of the dead women. Odach an brot oina dum vahas, who's trying to steal the green cloak from my grip, from my hands. So what we're realizing, if men come with an exploitative, if the farmers come with an exploitative mindset and try and steal the bounty of nature, woman, the goddess, can rise up on a moment, at a moment, as they say, on the moment, and take back her power again. Now, there's so many different accounts of that, from the Glasgowlan to, which is another, a cow who gives everything to everyone they need. She's a representative of nature. But again, if she is treated badly, my men, there is hell to pay, hell to pay.
And presumably, then, Manchán, if you kind of study the myths and stories and language, you could kind of put together a body of law of how humans should be and what the kind of old ritual, you talked about rituals, would look like to kind of keep the balance or kind of meet that law. Is that something that is alive? Is that something you've done? Could that be done?
Yeah, it's something that's coming alive again. So again, I get to understand the Irish condition more and the Irish question more when I talk to Aboriginal people and First Nations people in Canada and the States, who have all had the lost generation because of residential schools. So they have lost, a lot of them are retrying to find their own culture again, having so much of it wiped out, having lost their language, they lost their myths. And Ireland is a bit like that too. So we kept our language, thank God, on the very periphery. And those places, the Gaeltacht, where it was most strong, in other words, the places where it never died out, the Irish-speaking areas, they're weakening now. Like, Irish is increasing in the cities, but it's not the lore. It's not that ancient Irish that opened up yourself. Like the Irish I learned in West Kerry, the sail on counter and altar is the way of describing it. On sail Ella, the other world, the mysterious world, is just as much a reality as this world. You are referring to both the whole time. In so many phrases, you can't refer to them without referring to the she, the Dina Maha, the good people, the fairy folk. So when I speak Irish, I am connected to the wider vision, to the world beyond the rational, the whole time. In terms of, and that's in the old Irish, when they teach Irish in schools, that doesn't really have so much of that. But the good example is that I always go is counter and altar. So counter, still, every school child will learn the word counter. It means a district or a location or an area. And we've forgotten that the opposite of counter was always altar. And altar means the other world, the nether world, the realm beyond. And the two of them are always right next to each other. So Pukin, the word means a supernatural covering that allows otherworldly beings appear invisible in this world. So we always had this idea that although we existed in this world, on altar, the other world was always just beyond, just between, just beneath us. And it was a natural to my mum, it was natural to my grandparents. But as I say, we lost a bit of that in the last 60 years. We're having to reconnect with that. And we're realizing that I've been pointing out some of the more positive, the more clear myths, but actually so many of our myths have been polluted or boulderdized, or just the deep meaning has been lost. And why would that have happened? Well, let's say most of the great myth is in manuscripts. Now, they were written down by the monks from the 8th century to the 12th, 14th century, 15th century even. Now, why did the monks do that? These were all pagan ideas. The monks had an agenda, and we don't know what it was. It could have just been love of lore, but it's unlikely. And it's kind of clear too that they polluted the myths. They took out the goddess entirely. They took out any actual rituals. Any of there's imbos forensi, which is a way of communicating with the other world by doing a few steps of ritual. But it seems the way it's been written down in the 14th and 15th and 16th century and 17th century by the great Welshman Cambrensis Geraldus, that it was polluted. They were made to seem barbaric, and so some of the details weren't kept so that we wouldn't be able to go back to our pure lore. So in some ways we do have direct connection. Like for the women. So it said it was Christianity from the 5th century onwards got rid of the goddess idea and imposed this patriarchal view on Ireland. The Christians did first, the Christians, then the Normans, then the Vikings, the Normans, and the British, and they got rid of so much of the power of the goddess. But women, Ban Fassa, wise women, and Ban Livina, herbal women, kept some of the knowledge alive down to the 20th century. But it's not written, because they knew by this stage they had been exploited. So I think there's women in Ireland who have a lot of this knowledge. In one way, I'm the wrong person to ask because I don't have all the insights. And I know there's been women who've kept rituals and knowledge alive, and it hasn't been safe for them to communicate. But what amazed me was only when these Cree elders that I was working with last year, I said to them, we've lost so much of our female energy by the goddess. And they said, how would you know? And they were so right. Me as a male, they're not going to have told me. And the minute they said to me, I had goosebumps because I remembered hearing about this Awi Nagat or Uiv Nagat in Roscommon, which is the cave of the female goddess. Also the cave of transformation. Awi Nagat means Uig, the cave of Nagat, or the god of the cats, or of the god of the wars. And this was where Queen Maeve. So Queen Maeve was this great goddess. She was a semi-divine queen, so existed in human form, but was also a goddess. And there's so many stories about Queen Maeve. So the whole Táin Bó Cúailnge, the great mythological, like the Mahabharata of India, the Ireland's version is the Táin Bó Cúailnge, the great epic myth. It's all about Queen Maeve. And she lived in Rathcroghan, in Roscommon. There was in Connacht on the west side of the Shannon, which is a wilder place of Ireland. And her power animals, her beasts, were kept in Awi Nagat. And again, the stories of the men, Cuchulainn and the other Connachur Mór and the other male heroes, asking Maeve, could they try and go down into her cave of transformation? So it was a ritual place, it was a place of transformation that if you needed to step beyond another level to do a ritual of transformation, you went to this place. And the stories of men going down, and like Cuchulainn and some other warriors went down, and they just were confronted with the power of the goddess and the fears and the worry, and very few of them came out alive. They definitely all came out scratched and burnt. Now, what's amazing, I have heard about this for decades, but I could never find it. I could find nothing about it in any books or the internet, and it wasn't there, but it was known about. There's been women who've kept this knowledge alive. And again, what I knew was in Roscommon and I knew was in Rathcroghan, and every time I'd be going from Mayo back across the country, I would stop. I'd go down every back Bohereen, every back little laneway, trying to find it. And then finally, I think only about 3-4 years ago, went down a lane, a grass, covered lane with cul-de-sac ending in nowhere, and I saw these people in Patagonia jackets and North Face jackets, tourists, obviously, foreign tourists, in the middle of a field. And I pulled the car up. I said, "What are you doing?" They said, "Oh, we're here for Awi Nagat." They knew where it was. The people of Roscommon, of that area, had kept it alive, and they've started telling people and leading people. So you would never find it. I know now why I've been looking. It's just a hole in the ditch of a field. It looks like a badger's den or a fox's lair. And you have to crawl your way through this tiny hole, basically maximum a meter wide, into the mud. And it's just there's a hazel tree and a holly tree above it. I know a hawthorn tree and a holly. You crawl your way in there, and you and you go down. It gets deeper and deeper and deeper. Like, it was the most petrifying experience for me, because I decided I shouldn't bring a film, I shouldn't bring a torch. I should go down and just experience this. If this was the place where ritual transformation happened, where I might be able to get in touch with the soul of the land again, where I might be able to hear her speak, I should do it on my own. And I didn't even have a helmet. Like, I banged my head. It's very small, very rocky, goes down 40 meters and then opens up into this massive chasm, this almost cathedral-like limestone space. And I was petrified, because the minute I knew, okay, if you're in a landscape, a limestone underworld realm, limestone is composed by rivers. At any time it's porous. At any time, if a flood happens, the water is going to drown me, I thought. But that was profound. And what we're all realizing, and not just me, so many of us in the last 5 or 6 years, so many of these ritual sites have survived. Like I said, these sacred wells that all became forgotten and overgrown. And the last 5 or 10 years ago, 10 years, there's Facebook groups, there's people hunting them down, not just asking the elders. The older people in the community still know, and just pulling the ivy, pulling the holly, pulling the nettles aside, and revealing them, cleaning the water, and finding the source of energy that's always nourished us through all the darkness of colonialism, of Christianity, of Christian oppression, and everything.
So I'm quite interested in your experience in that cave then, Manchán. So it feels like, perhaps our ancestors, and maybe even today, it's the seers and the kind of medicine people that kind of hold this conversation. But how easy is it for any of us to find that ditch and go into the cave? How easy is it for us to go and walk by the river and receive kind of poetic inspiration? Is this something we can all do? And how was your experience in the cave then?
Yeah. So I'm more and more convinced it was. Like, I am in no way empathic or intuitive. You can see me. I'm so stuck in my own brain. Like, I am the last person to be doing this. I'm sort of good at some things. When I go out walking in nature, I've always had these otherworldly spirits since a child, since I was a child, being able to speak to them. But genuinely, I'm not empathic. I mean, yeah, I can feel a good tree, but I am not walking with the angels anymore most of the time. I am rational. I'm objective. I'm an Irish Times journalist, like, for God's sake. And it was really the elders, the indigenous elders. And again, it's embarrassing that we've lost our elders, or somehow it's the indigenous elders are telling me, Manchán, you need to go out and listen. I say, no, how do I know I won't make it up? How do I know it's not going to be raw maish or rubbish that comes out of my mouth? And they say, we need to allow all that. They said, it's so awkward for us. The Aboriginal people say it's so awkward for them. They're mortified because they lost, because of the oppression of the residential schools and the boarding schools in both places. They lost their culture. They're having to blindly feel their way, and so are we. And so what a great man, Louis Cardinal, said to me in Edmonton, he said in Alberta, he said, we need to be brave, and we need to intuit, go to these places, intuit. A lot of what we get is going to be wrong, just because we are awkward. We're out of touch with this. But what is important will stay. People will resonate what's important, and people will realize, oh, that's a bit egotistical and that's rubbish. So it's not a comfortable time for any of us. And what there was, as I said, in Ireland, in these sacred sites, the like of Newgrange or the Hill of Ishnach, this central, which is the naval point of Ireland. It's in Westmeath, between Mullingar and Athlone, and it is where the world met, the world above, the world of the land, and the world below. It is the umbilical cord. And there's been people who've done rituals there, but they're a tiny group. A lot of them actually were sort of English crusties, can you call them? People who were doing the fighting for roads in the mid 80s in Britain. A lot of them somehow heard about these places, and I'd meet them in the late 80s, early 90s. And a lot of them were very angry, and a lot of them were on the dole, but they alienated the mainstream, because they were the people who kept the energy alive were more radical. And often they'd be dismissed as hippies or just as eco nuts and eco warriors, but they're the ones who kept the knowledge. We owe them so much. But for some reason, what I think is behoven on all of us now at this time, and what the land is calling for, that us more mundane, more mainstream, duller people who aren't quite as in tune with nature find our own way back to it. Because, you know, there was a bit of proprietorship, of ownership. If you go to one of these sacred sites in Ireland, a bit like if you go to Stonehenge, there can be the people, the regulars who go there, and they're not maybe as open. And this is knowledge for everyone. It's not in any way exclusive to Ireland. This idea of the goddess, you know, it is in every part of the world, where we're just lucky in Europe, because Scotland, Ireland, parts of Wales were more on the outside. We kept some of this old lore and this awareness alive. But it's as awkward for us as it is someone in a really industrial place, like, you know, like Germany, or like Milton Keynes. You know, we all need to find our way. And it can help if we have the Irish language, it can help. But oh yeah, I wanted to say about the myths. The problem with a lot of the myths is because, well, we know, I said, the Christians had their own slant on them, but the only reason we have them now in English, or even in modern Irish, as opposed to in Sean Gaelga, the old Irish that they're written in, is because people in the 1890s, from the 1890s on, was the beginning of the Gaelic revival, the beginning of us going back to our lore and waking up. It was part of a movement of nationalism all over Europe. And the people who translated our text, a lot of them were my relations. T.F. O'Reilly, the great translator, was a cousin. Cecil O'Reilly, who translated the Town Book Coil, another cousin. I used to spend every Christmas with her. She was younger than T.F., but T.F. was beginning in the 1910s, 1920s. They had a particular Victorian mindset. So they removed some of the real sexual power of the goddess. Like, you know, 2 weeks ago, I wrote a new book called Focal Naman, which are Irish words for the vagina, the vulva, the clitoris, and the period. They all existed, but they were never written down. They're still in Caintlanina, in the people's language, but they're not written down. And women, thankfully, are now going into the Gaeltacht and pulling back this idea. So our myths have been sanitized again, you know, first by the monks and then by the translators, the academics from the 1890s up until the 1950s. And what was the last thing I wanted to say about that? Oh yeah, the other big agenda was, so my great granduncle was Theo O'Reilly, another great person looking into the lore of Ireland. But of course, he was one of the founders of the Irish Revolution. And so many, Arthur Griffith, even Yeats, they were looking at the myths, trying to give sparks or catalysts or fodder to found the revolution. So they decided they were only going to focus on the myths that were to do with macho, strong men who beheaded all their enemies and smited everyone down. And it was just because that was what was needed. As you know, every myth is reinterpreted for every generation. And what we needed from 1890 up to 1920, when it was vital that we freed ourselves from Britain, were these warsome folk stories that didn't ever talk about the goddess much at all, but really just about the warrior men. And so we need to cleanse that too. What we need is to take all our myths and to have them retold. There was an attempt by the great Mary Heaney, by Seamus Heaney's wife, to do it in 1994. But as she says, like, hers are now 25 years old. We need new, intuitive, ideally young women. And it doesn't need to be just women. You know, the beauty of now of this idea of all of us on a spectrum, but people who have a wider mindset, who aren't, like, I was born in 1970. I'm absolutely stuck in this sort of patriarchal, misogynistic mindset. So I'm the wrong person to be doing this work, but I'm the only one at the moment. I will be overtaken very, very soon, I can assure you.
Brilliant, thank you. And I'd love to open it up to questions. So if you have a question, and I'm sure there will be many, if you raise your electronic hand, then we'll try and get to as many people as possible. So if you want to do that now, but before that happens, Manchán, there was two things I'd love you just to say a tiny little bit about, or maybe one of them, the Kaliak you talked about earlier. We often have Sharon Blackie talking with us, and that's one of the kind of characters that she talks a lot about. So I just wondered about what you would like to say about her. And also the other thing that I really have been loving about your book is this idea of the other world being so closely connected with our kind of consensus reality, and this idea of portals to the other world. You know, I wondered if you could just say a little bit about that. Where are these portals? How do you know that there's a portal? Experience of other world in our kind of rational world.
So again, if we can take some time off and go around some of either the holy wells or the stone circles in Britain or Scotland or in Ireland, we will begin to feel things. It's hard. We're all a bit dead inside at the moment, but the land, it seems to me, definitely wants to speak, even to someone like me who's not empathic, not intuitive. So I think the sites that were important to our ancestors, and thank God we know the sites. I saw a few have been destroyed, but in Ireland, like I mentioned, Aoinegat, the cave of female transformation, it's there, it can be visited. I mentioned the Hill of Ishnach, which is the navel, the sacred navel, where all of the energy, there's a portal for all the energy to arrive in the country. And again, there was stories at Bealtaine in the Mayfast, there were these sacred fires lit there, and then that sacred fire was brought to the other ritual ceremonial sites. In Ireland, we know all the ceremonial sites, mainly because St. Patrick decided he had to convert each one of them. So he focused on them again. He realized the only way he was going to take control was by going to these places that were so important to us. So it's not hard to find. As I said, the wells and the stone circles, some of them are more powerful. Some of them seem more powerful to me than others. It's an inch, maybe it's, who knows? Is it just a subjective thing, or we will find the ones that make us feel good. Key thing, is to go Deschel around them, go sunwise around them. Everything in Ireland, still to this day, is done Deschel, sunwise. It's the sacred way of going in ritual with the energy. It's really important we do that. So still today, like if I'm out on Inisheer, one of the Iron Islands, and elsewhere, if I sneeze, some will say Dealing, God be with us. There they don't. They say Deschel. They say, may you go sunwise. It's basically invoking the sun god. It is pure pagan sun worship that has remained alive. So this idea, yeah, that we know the ritual sites are all in the guidebooks. It's kind of easy. There's going to be some that have been so sacred, like one that I didn't know about. It was just down the road for me. It was Tlachtka. It's called the Hill of Ward because there was a man called Ward in the 18th century, but its original name was Tlachtka. It's near Athboy in County Meath. And I said, I've been living there for 25 years. To my shame, I never knew. Because let's say there's tourist sites like Newgrange and the Hill of Tara where tourists go. No tourists go to Tlachtka. It was an area where the druids went, or the spiritual, the sort of more shamanic people went for their ritual. So the fire began there, the sacred fire ritual, and then was brought elsewhere in the same way that the fire began at the Hill of Ishnach too and was brought elsewhere. And what does Tlachtka mean? Tlach means earth, and then God means spear. So it's earth spear. And there was Tlachtka is also a goddess who came down from earth, came down from the land. And the only myth now is about how she was raped by men hundreds of times for not submitting her power. That's a Christian story that's been put on top to try and bang down to hide from the goddess. Just very briefly, because there's people's hands up, the Cailleach. Amazingly, in Scotland and Ireland, everything was about the Cailleach. And still today, when you're in Donegal, they say, come say Cailleach. How are you, Cailleach? They still, what does Cailleach mean? Cail means a veil. So it's really a veiled woman. So you could say it's a nun. If you want to be very boring, Cailleach just means nun. But no, the women before that were veiled in the same way as a lot of the herbal women, even when I was growing up in the 70s, they tended to be wearing the cloak or the veil. And she's so much more. So were human Cailleachs around, but she was really a goddess, and she was the persona of winter. So the Cailleach arrived in October at around the time of Samhain, at the time where the darkness begins to win over the sun. And she has her cudgel or her stick or her fachel, and she beats down all the last bits of growth, of all the last bits of autumn, of summer and autumn growth, to bring in the darkness and despair and the bleakness of winter. So it looks like she's a goddess of destruction. And again, Kaili, because it's an Indo-European language, its root is the same as Kali, another goddess of destruction in India. So the Cailleach brings on destruction, but of course in Ireland everything is circular, everything is yes and. So the Cailleach then on the 1st of February transforms into Bridget or Brídóg, which is the goddess of new life, the goddess of the seed, the goddess of absolute maidenhood and fertility. So the Cailleach, the goddess of destruction, brings us down into the other world of darkness, of blackness, where the sun rarely rises above the horizon. And then on the 1st of February, she gets transformed into Bridget. And we have poems of the Cailleach, Manchán Magan. And what does she say? She says, I remember a time where the ocean to the west of us was uirvi on the varige in a krill crocach glass, when the sea was a hilly green mountains. So it's almost she's remembering Pangaea, almost she's remembering before the continents, before the ice sheets melted and the water rose. um, or before that, again, back to Pangaea, before the two continents split apart. All of her stories, she's saying, I am ancient. When I was young, there was only gods and kings, and there was no such thing as Christianity. She's saying, and she remembers glacial times. There's times where she says, I remember the great three great waves that flooded off the coast of Ireland and into the sea. And the time that she says it happened is exactly the time of 10,000 years ago, the time where, or 10 to 12, where the ice sheet was retreating and the first settlers were coming. So there's so much about the Kyla. And the Kyla from the goddess, again, they're very similar. It's about powerful female forms representing by the land.
Thank you. Brilliant. Okay, let's do some questions. Helena, you were first. Would you like to unmute?
Hi, good evening. Can you all hear me?
Yes, brilliant.
So I've been following Manchán's work for a while. I'm not Irish. I moved to Ireland in 2015. And I'm a historian and an author. I wrote a book on Loftus Hall, but I specialize with energy of the land as well. And that was one of the things that I noticed about this place. The land was definitely speaking to me. And I wanted to add something in and ask you a question, if that's okay. I specialize with the Knights Templar. That's where I'm working with now. And Gnosticism as well. And the idea of the goddesses that you're mentioning, the different goddesses, the rivers, all the goddesses in the land. For me, Ireland was a threshold, a place that was in the middle of what was known and what was unknown, the new world. So our thresholds, the domain of Hecate, another goddess, they're places of transformation, of growth, of healing. You spoke about fertility. And Ireland, I feel it's a land of the goddess Air, also of healing, not just fertility, but the idea of healing and fertility for me is connected to the Shekinah or the Shekinah in Hebrew. So for me, all these goddesses, as Carl Jung wrote about, are connected. They're basically energies or facets of the energy, the divine feminine energy of God, which was embodied by the priestess in the sacred sex rituals of the sun and the moon, the Hieros Gamos. So my question to you is, I know that center places are important in antiquity, like the Hill of Uisneach, and I'm trying to get to know places in Ireland because I feel that there was a very particular reason why foreigners were attracted to the land here. And the energy in Ireland is very, very different to anywhere else. I mean, I've lived all over the world and traveled everywhere. So I feel that they came here for that specific purpose. What places in Ireland would you recommend me and other people who are listening here, besides the centre place, obviously Clonmacnoise and the Hill of Uisneach and all these places that are significant besides the places that you've mentioned for energy connection purposes? And specifically, I don't know if you know anything about the Knights Templar or what they were doing, but there is a connection with them as well. So I'm trying to find Templar preceptories. I work with ley lines. I map ley lines as well. So, and I actually wanted to connect with you. I had wanted to reach out to you and have a discussion as well.
Yeah, thank you for that, Helena. So, God, there's so many sites, whether it is going to be Croagh in Mayo, the sacred totemic, hill there at Westport, or Mount Brandon down in Kerry, which was the place of, St. Brendan, but actually before that, it was Trum Dove. The high peaks, any of those high peaks in Ireland, on the west coast of Ireland, were places which were powerful. And again, even in Wicklow and Tipperary on the east coast, you have so many places called Sea Fin, the seat of Finn McCool. And again, all of them will have a cairn or a passage tomb or some Neolithic site. What's interesting, is we're not descended from the Neolithic people. We're Bronze Age settlers. Somehow we arrived and seem to have taken those archaeological sites that weren't connected to us. At least that's what the latest DNA is saying in archaeology. We might be able to find out that there was some, but definitely in terms of DNA, we're not related to the Neolithic people, but we kept their stories and their lore alive. I don't know how. As you say, there's something about the land of Ireland. It's hard to say that because one doesn't want to be exceptional in any way. But why? You get the same in Iceland. Why, when Americans or Germans come here, do they imagine they see leprechauns? Or why is the fairy folk like we in Ireland? We laughed, we were ashamed at our connection to leprechauns. And leprechaun, they're the she, as said, the fairy people. Leprechaun means just like sort of well, there's many different translations for it, but it's just little human, really. Luchorpain, little human. But the she, the fairy folk, again, it's a Sanskrit word and are connected. It's an Indo-European word, but it has a Sanskrit connection. And the Sanskrit version is Siddha. We sort of Siddha, we know Siddha, Siddha Yogini. Siddha is, you find it in Hinduism, in Buddhism, in Jainism. It's a human being who's attained a certain degree of enlightenment. And what do we know about the fairies? They are these beings that live in nature in the most beautiful wild places, or the fairy forts or the ring forts, all scattered all over Ireland. And what we know from our parents, or definitely our grandparents, went to these sites, or kept away from the sites if they were afraid, or went to the fairy forts and the ring forts if they needed help. And the fairies gave them wisdom, they gave them healing, so they were just like the Siddha. They were these beings who were beyond and above the human condition, and were half God and half spirit. And again, that word Siddha, it's connected to the Irish word which is Síochána, peace. So Síochána is peace. In Scots Gaelic, it's Siddha. So it means either peace and fairy. So one of the things is saying, people, as you said, did always recognize Ireland was special. And even in Christianity, talking about the Knights Templar. So there was this idea of, remember, Jesus said he would return when he reached Finibus Terra, Latin word, Finibus Terra. Finibus, the end of Terra, of the land. Now, from mainland Europe, and even Eastern Europe, and even from the Mediterranean, from Jerusalem, and the Middle East, and that's why, they looked in Syria, where the Christian monks were. They looked, where was Finibus Terra? Where was the edge of the world? It was Ireland. That was the edge of the known world. So that's why it was so important for these monks to come, not only to Ireland, but to come to the very west. So as you said, I've been talking about the central areas here, really the powerful places, I mean, for the Christians, but actually everywhere they came, we're now finding there was a Bronze Age and a Neolithic ritual site before that. So the Blasket Islands, Skellig Michael, this, rock off the coast of Kerry, Tory Island, the rock off Iron Island. Sorry, the Tory Island, this most remote island off Ireland, off Donegal, or the Iron Islands, which is Dún Aengus and Dún Dúchar. Any of those sites will have the hairs on the back of your neck standing up, will give you goosebumps.
Right. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Helena.
Thank you, Helena. Shreya, we have 10 minutes left, so if we could ask the essences of our questions, that would be wonderful. Thank you, Shreya.
Yeah, sure. Manchán, I recently got listened to a few of your podcasts, and you live in Westmead in your 10 acres and stuff. So my question is, I have a full-time job at the moment, but I always dream about buying land and living off the land. But my question is, should we all kind of leave our jobs and stop living in the cities and move to the land and, kind of live more in tune with nature and not run after money? Like, is it for everyone, or how do we make that change?
I spend so much of my time living in the real world and running after money. Like I was, when I was 23 and 24 in 1994, I was living in communes up in British Columbia, up in the Kootenay Mountains of British Columbia. And I lived in a commune down in Ecuador. I went to visit another one in Peru. I spent a lot of time in India in alternative communities. And none of them were the answer. We were all isolating ourselves from the world. And I just think now is a time where we need to be rooted in the world. And also, if we can find a little bit of time to connect with the world beyond. But it's heady stuff. We don't want to be doing this like 24/7. We'll go around the bend. I think the beauty, we found this in COVID a little bit. Okay, we have weekends. We can go for walks. We can go for swim. Ireland is so small, luckily. I mean, as I said, the ritual sites are in France, they're in Britain, they're everywhere. But if I'm focusing on Ireland, the ritual sites they're easy to get at, and we just go to a few and we see how we feel. But I don't think in any way do we need to, and the farming I do, it's sort of pretend farm, it's gentleman farming. The one thing the grants at the moment in the EU for forestry are so brilliant. So it's very practical and easy to buy land. Land is very cheap in Ireland compared to other countries, and to forest it. I mean, putting a house on it is a nightmare. Planning permission is both expensive and difficult. But we could get a patch of land, forested with native woodlands, and you'll have the cost of the land paid back within 15 years from the grants. You just get on to the Department of Forestry, they'll tell you. And then from then on in, you, well, then you own the land. You own the land and you own the forestry. So that's one practical way. But again, we're all so busy. Why do we, maybe we shouldn't be putting on the whole ordeal of like taking on land or forestry. There's ways of accessing these without owning. Thank you for the question.
Brilliant, thank you, Shreya. Monica.
Hi, Manchán.
Hello.
Could you talk a bit about, you talked about the Cailleach becoming, the Brido becoming Bridget at Imbolc. Could you talk a bit about Bridget as goddess, Bridget as saint, and Bridget in contemporary Ireland, and the creation of the national holiday, and just that? I'd be interested to hear what you say. I have a concern that there's something very fiery about Bridget the goddess that's not carrying through.
Yeah. I mean, I think all of this is so awkward, our knowledge, and so half known. So, you know, and again, I'm not an expert in anything. I'm bringing certain easy knowledge that I'm finding available, and it's never is it the full story. Like even that thing, when I say Cailleach and Bridget, it's not a duality, as we know. Everything is a circle in all good Indigenous culture, and particularly in Ireland. So it's not just, I shouldn't end it there. I should say, yes, Cailleach is winter, Bridget is spring, and then it's also Bealtaine. It's also the flourishing of summer. It's the woman in all her steps, from the seed to giving birth to flourishing, to giving birth, and then to going into demise. It's the three. It's everything. It's like, hasn't it been amazing what has happened in the last 2 years with the Bridget's Festival? Like, again, I would never have guessed that the government would give us a national day, and that so many people would get excited and feel something inside us. And like, we've been under the cudgel of the Christian church, which did us a lot of good as well as harm, you know, but we've been under it so long. And as we know, there's so many accounts of bishops and priests, some were sort of in favor of Bridget, but there's so many who did not want us worshipping Bridget, did not want us going to the well. So as you say, everything's, again, it's, we just need a new generation to intuit these things. But so many of the stories about Bridget is fire, isn't she? She has this sacred fire, and beautifully that even the nuns who kept the story alive kept the sacred fire. But it's do we understand fire anymore? I don't. Like, and I'm now trying to come through it through sweat lodges, through sort of Native American rituals, but I don't have the answers. I am ignorant on so many of these things. But as you say, so much more does need to come out, and I believe it'll be more women who are more intuitive and more in tune with all this than me.
I think we've probably got room for two more. Kathleen, you're next.
Thank you so much, Rachel, and hi, Manchán. I'm a huge fan. I love your work. Thanks so much for doing this today. I live in so-called Canada. I've moved across it for my whole life, now living in Toronto. And I'm wondering if you have any advice or tips or thoughts for folks who are not in Ireland, who, you know, have Irish heritage way back, but we've moved here and have done colonialism here. And so trying to toe the line of reconnecting with the land in a way that's respectful to the first peoples of the land that we're on. I'm really curious to hear your thoughts about this. I've done a lot of work with Indigenous communities here, talking to elders and stuff, but you know, I always grapple with the feeling that it's not my land to connect with in a way. And I'm wondering if you have any thoughts about that. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I do think, I don't know how, like, you know, I'm also afraid of saying Indigenous in Ireland, indigeneity, because we're not. At the moment, you know, we're polluting all our rivers, we're polluting the land. We have a government that is not looking after the best interests. But I think all of us in the world are seeking to reconnect with elements of indigeneity. And it's in no way going to be a national, like there's a danger the way I speak about Ireland so much, because it can be looked at as to do with a nation or an island. It's not. The only useful thing about Ireland is it's a country that didn't have as much industrialization as the rest of Europe. So the energy of the land is a little bit more accessible, but I do believe it's just as accessible in Austria, or I think it's even more accessible in places like Slovenia and Croatia. But and as we know, when we go to Canada, there's something powerful there. So I think all of us are just trying to communicate, go back in touch with the land, or with trees, or with water. And we don't need to harken back to Ireland. That was another thing, probably a cul-de-sac we went down in the 20th century, because the emigrant experience was so tragic and people just had such loss. Like some of them are 20th century songs and lore. It's just about tragedy of losing the connection with Ireland. And I don't think it's to do with, I think it's bigger than that. I know I can stand on the ocean in BC or by a lakeshore in near Toronto and get that connection. I mean, at the same time, we don't want to deny there is something special about places, about being some parts of Scotland or some parts of Ireland or some parts of the south of France. But I don't think it should limit us. And I think, again, I've just finished writing an article about the rituals, the trauma rituals that both us and particularly Native First Nations in Canada are doing, trying to address the legacy of what we've lost and the trauma we've been through. And there's so much that we can share, and we all need help as well. Like as you said, the Native people do not need to be hounded by us for their wisdom, but actually it's about all of us supporting. I think so many of them, particularly in Canada, because they maybe haven't been quite as directly abused as much in the States, they're amazingly open, aren't they? Particularly if we go respect and don't take from them. So I think we can do so much in Canada with, maybe if we can afford it, the odd trip back to Ireland and to see. And I think once there are more sources, I think once there are a new version of myths available, that they will go beyond place, I think, because the truths in them aren't just to do with one location. They are, they're about energy and about earth, otherworldly resonances, I think.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you. You're on mute, Rachel.
Thank you. Good point. I'm just saying quietly behind the mute that I think we are going to call it there because we only have a couple of minutes to go. So I was going to thank everybody for those wonderful questions, and so many apologies to the three of you with your hands up. Manchán, that was brilliant. It feels like time has expanded and we've just heard so much. You will all receive the recording so you can go back and unpick and unravel the beautiful threads and words that we shared there. We'll also share the chat with you, so I'm seeing some great information coming up in the chat too. So just to say that for those of you who didn't get to ask questions and would like to see more of Manchán, he has promised to come and do an online workshop with us in March. So hopefully we will have the opportunity in this space again. We haven't managed to get that up on our website yet, but if you sign up to our newsletter, then we can keep you up to date on the details of that. So I wanted to say thank you to all of you for coming tonight, and sorry it's been such a quick whistle-stop tour of Ireland's myths and communications with the land. Manchán, it's been so wonderful for you to come. Thank you so much indeed, and I hope this is the first of very many.
I love that. Thank you, Rachel. Thank you. And again, just remember, it's really, all of us are going to intuit the answers. I have a tiny element of the answers that I'm putting there, but I'm going to realize how wrong I am myself in 10 years and how much I was blind to,
Well, thank you for kind of sharing your insights at this moment then, and in 10 years time we'll be continuing to see what you have to say, so that's wonderful. Thank you. So I'd love to say good night to everybody and see you again soon.